injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
Born on December 18, 1947 in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, United States, Judith Heumann got polio, which infected her spinal cord, causing paralysis. Judith Heumann was to live her life in a wheelchair. In 1949, in Brooklyn, New York, institutionalization was the status quo for people with disabilities. Judith was denied her right to attend school because she was a fire hazard. Around 1968, people with disabilities could not go to public schools because they were not accessible. They stayed home and received about 2.5 hours a week of lessons from a visiting teacher with the intervention of occupational therapists. Her Holocaust surviving parents played a strong role in fighting for her rights as a child. Parents banded together and petitioned the Board of Education to make some of the public schools wheelchair accessible. From her early in life, Judy learned to be a fighter for equality and an advocate for equal access in an unequal world to belong in school and society. The first civil rights movement initiated by Heumann to challenge the discriminatory system was a time when the New York Board of Education denied her teaching license. After successfully passing the first two parts towards her teaching license, Heumann was disqualified in a physical exam. At the time, a majority of people believed that disability was something to be cured to get equal rights, and Judy refused to believe that people with disabilities were the problem. She refused to step the lines of disability is a blight on society. If you ignore it, it will go away. In 1970, demanding visibility and change for disabled individuals, Heumann and several friends founded Disabled in Action (DIA), initially called Handicapped in Action, to secure the protection of people with disabilities under civil rights laws through political protests and public debates. In October 1972, President Nixon vetoed early versions of the Rehabilitation Act. The act was the subject of heated debate and compromise in Congress and the White House. President Nixon vetoed earlier versions of the bill in October 1972 and March 1973 because he feared the law, while well-intentioned, would have unforeseen repercussions for both the government and the people it was supposed to help. Heumann spearheaded protests where 80 activists staged a sit-in on Madison Avenue, stopping traffic. She believed that collective actions with other people with disabilities would get people's attention to their needs for equal rights and social change. She opened a public debate to change people's perceptions of people with disabilities. After successive vetoes, President Richard M. Nixon signed the Rehabilitation Act into law on September 26, 1973. It was the first legislation to address the notion of equal access for individuals with disabilities through the removal of architectural, employment, and transportation barriers. It also created rights for persons with disabilities through affirmative action programs. In addition, the legislation attempted to address some of the societal barriers faced by individuals with disabilities, including isolation by placement in institutions, limited access to buildings, and discrimination in education and employment. The Rehabilitation Act of 1973 included the Little Notice Section 504, which was based on the 1964 Civil Rights Act and mandated the integration of people with disabilities into mainstream institutions. But the language was broad, only noting that no qualified individual with a disability in the United States shall be excluded from, denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity that either receives federal financial assistance or is conducted by any executive agency or the United States Postal Service.
What 504 was. And that was really very important. Creating effective grant applications that would not only help disabled people and parents learn about the law and the rules, but also in learning about what the law was, they had to learn about what it wasn't.
Despite the act of Congress, people with disabilities still had no right to an education, public transit, or even to a courtroom. As late as the 1970s, there were no federally mandated social services or agencies for individuals living with disabilities. If an individual wanted to hire an in-home attendant or interpreter, it had to happen through pre-existing social networks. This all changed after the San Francisco 504 sit-in protest that happened in 1977.
Well, what's going on now is an overnight sit-in. Actually, the demonstration is going on throughout the entire nation: Washington, New York, Denver, here in San Francisco.
I can tell you that every time you raise issues of separate but equal, the outrage of disabled individuals across the country is going to continue. It is going to be ignited. There will be more takeovers of buildings until finally maybe you begin to understand our position. We will no longer allow the government to oppress disabled individuals. We want the law enforced.
Under 504, non-discrimination became a legal fundamental right. Within months of the sit-in, noticeable changes began to take place in urban landscapes, in university classrooms, in the workplace, and in public spaces including libraries, courtrooms, and public transit. Cities instituted curb cuts from street to the sidewalk. Federal buildings made adjustments to become accessible to all, including installing ramps and wider restroom stalls. Regulations instituted as a result of the success of 504 ushered in a new era of accessibility that led to the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act in 1990. Over 1,000 individuals marched from the White House to the U.S. Capitol on March 13, 1990, demanding that Congress enact the Americans with Disabilities Act. About 60 of them crawled up the Capitol steps, leaving their wheelchairs and other mobility aids behind. The Capitol Crawl, as it's known, was a tangible demonstration of the negative effects of inaccessible design on individuals with disabilities. It also emphasized the importance of passing the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was signed into law by President George H.W. Bush on July 26, 1990. The ADA is a civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against individuals with disabilities in all areas of public life, including jobs, schools, transportation, and all public and private places that are open to the general public. The purpose of the law is to make sure that people with disabilities have the same rights and opportunities as everyone else. The ADA gives civil rights protections to individuals with disabilities similar to those provided to individuals on the basis of race, color, sex, national origin, age, and religion. It guarantees equal opportunity for individuals with disabilities in public accommodations, employment, transportation, state and local government services, and telecommunications. From 2002 to 2006, as the World Bank's first advisor on disability and development, Heumann supported as much as she could, making an improvement in programs and policies. Later, her actions showed that it led the World Bank's disability work to expand the bank's knowledge and capability to work with governments and civil society. This helped make more discussions and alertness to other countries, influencing policies of many countries. She was the lead consultant to the Global Partnership for Disability and Development. From 1993 to 2001, Heumann served in the Clinton administration as the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Special Education and Rehabilitative Services in the Department of Education. Heumann was responsible for the implementation of legislation at the national level for programs in special education, disability research, vocational rehabilitation, and independent living, serving more than 8 million youth and adults with disabilities. For more than 30 years, Heumann has been involved on the international front working with disabled people's organizations and governments around the world to advance the human rights of disabled people. She represented Education Secretary Richard Rowley at the 1995 International Congress on Disability in Mexico City. She was a U.S. delegate to the 4th United Nations World Conference on Women in Beijing, China. She has been active with Disabled Peoples International, Rehabilitation International, and numerous independent living centers throughout the world. She co-founded the Center for Independent Living in Berkeley, California, and the World Institute on Disability in Oakland, California.
The world needs to recognize that disabled people have historically been discriminated against. And they need to look at how that discrimination how it came about, and what its impact is.